Hi, I'll be reading from my memoir called In Another Place, With and Without My Father, Norman Mailer, published, as Bonnie said, by Northampton House Press. I'm going to read a chapter called Rocky Mountain Crash. Near the end of August, Dad took me to the airport. I was wearing a danskin top and bell-bottom jeans. He put an arm around my waist and said, "You have a tiny waist. I used to wrap my fingers around Bee's waist. You remind me of your mother." This time, the reference was a compliment, a loving going-away gesture. In a few days, I'd be heading off to Boulder to attend the University of Colorado graduate school in an anthropology PhD program. I was leaving behind my college boyfriend, Eric, and 4 years of university life in New York City. It had been the longest, most uninterrupted stretch of time I'd ever spent with my father and the rest of the Mailer family. But I was too excited at the moment about my new adventure to stop and feel what these changes meant. Boulder was certainly different from New York City. Everyone seemed beautiful, athletic, and blonde. When I walked down the street, strangers would stop to say hello and wish me a nice day. What a difference from Barnard and Columbia, where so many averted their gaze so as not to have to speak to anyone. No intellectual Woody Allen type here. Everyone hiked, swam, skied, and played basketball. In Boulder, football was considered a serious endeavor. The players were idols who got all the prettiest girls. At Columbia, we had only gone to football games to enjoy the band and laugh at the players. We wouldn't have dreamed of belonging to a fraternity or sorority, yet here it was the thing to do. Soon I found a lovely small house to share with a couple of grad students and quickly found my niche with the chill and easygoing students and faculty of the anthropology department. The first year, I skied and hiked, and sometimes I studied. Life in Boulder felt like being on a long vacation. My brother Sal, who was living in Worcester with our mother, was having a hard time adjusting to living in the States. I invited him to Boulder thinking he'd enjoy the change. He was a natural athlete, so I took him skiing. After a couple of runs down the baby slopes, we were off to the expert runs. A month later, my sister Danielle arrived and I took her on the same tour. By then, I was in love with Colorado and wanted to share it with all my siblings. After I had been in Boulder for about a year, in October of 1972, I got a call from Dad. He'd been invited to speak at the University of Colorado. "Do you want me to come?" he asked. I was thrilled. The people who were organizing the event approached me to discuss some sort of social gathering after the conference. I told them I'd be happy to host it at my place. However, when Dad got off the plane, he was not alone. As he approached, I saw he was with a young woman I'd never met, a brunette, slightly older and taller than me. He introduced Suzanne as his assistant, but I didn't buy it. What chutzpah, even for Norman. Still, I put on the blandest face I could muster, let him out to the parking lot, and put their luggage into my new, old BMW. As a graduation present, Dad had given me $2,000 to buy a car. With the help of some automobile-savvy friends in Boulder, I settled on a 7-year-old BMW model 1600 with 100,000 miles on it. I paid $1,800, which left just enough for insurance. I loved my car. It was certainly well traveled, but it had spunk, it stuck to the road at high speed, and the steering was nervous and precise. A great vehicle for navigating mountain curves and icy streets, which was fundamental to Colorado. I drove it to Aspen and then cross-country to New York and back, adding another 10,000 miles without so much as a sigh from the vehicle. I proudly showed it off to my father. Then, with Dad in the front and Suzanne in the back, I started off for Boulder, feeling nervous about how he might be evaluating my driving skills. Dad was actually a terrible driver, although I wasn't aware of that. As he did with almost every other skill or activity, Dad gave off the aura of an expert driver. So I was on tenterhooks waiting for his verdict. Surprisingly, as we proceeded, he made no comment about my driving. That would come later. We decided to go out for an early dinner so we wouldn't be late for his 7:30 appearance. I took them to a quaint place tucked away in the mountains, about 20 minutes from Boulder. I was still trying to swallow my shock over Suzanne coming along. What about Carol? That was his wife at the time. We might not be best buddies, but Dad had put me in the uncomfortable role of an accomplice to adultery, a part I had not chosen to play. I'd always assumed he secretly had affairs, but now he was throwing one of his girlfriends in my face. Why bring her on this trip anyway? Could this new development be a serious relationship? I was very upset, and I was unable to stop ruminating. We had cocktails, then wine with dinner, which certainly helped my mood. The alcohol created a pleasant buzz and relaxed me. Soon, I stopped worrying about Carol. Dad, for his part, was engaging. He told Suzanne with obvious pride about how tough I had been as a kid, going into detail about taking me to the bullfight, about the old Angelito's road trip anecdote, and even the poor man his woman left and took the dishes story. Then, slightly tipsy, but still believing myself to be in control, I got behind the wheel to drive us back to Boulder. The winding mountain road had a sharp drop to the right and a sheer rocky face to the left. Again, Dad was in the passenger seat next to me, Suzanne in the back. It was already 7, and we had to be back on campus by 7:30, so perhaps I was driving faster than I should have. Certainly my reflexes were muddled. At that moment, Dad decided to give me a driving lesson. Sue, when you're driving on a narrow, winding road, you should. Annoyed, I turned my head to look at him, inadvertently moving the steering wheel sharply in his direction as well, the same direction as the drop. This high-strung car immediately veered towards the ravine, so I jerked the wheel left to compensate, but too fast and with too much energy. The car did an about-face and smashed into the mountainside. I felt the jolt in my neck and through the rest of my body. A few seconds later, I heard my father say, "Woohoo! Susie, are you okay? Suzanne, everyone okay?" Yes, we were all fine. No breaks, no bruises, just shaken up, but the car was totaled. We decided to leave it there and stood at the side of the road hoping someone would give us a ride. The first car that passed stopped, backed up, and took us straight to the university. We arrived at the theater a few minutes late and rushed backstage to get Dad ready to go on. Then Suzanne and I took our seats. After what had happened on the mountain, I was distracted, and I couldn't listen to most of his speech. I later heard it was pretty good, which wasn't a surprise since Norman was always energized by danger. Later, at the party at my house, I was hyper, speaking loudly and laughing too much. The accident was the main conversation piece. We were in the midst of a quite merry gathering when a police car pulled into the driveway. 2 big uniformed officers knocked on our door, and someone opened it. "Does Susan Mailer live here?" one of the policemen said. I rushed over. Yes, officer, here I am." "Are you the owner of a 1965 BMW, he asked, and read the license plate number from a notepad. "Yeah, that's my car." "Are you aware it's been in an accident and is now sitting abandoned on Arapahoe Mountain Road?" Yeah, I explained what had happened and why we had left it there, but they weren't sympathetic. I was nervous, wondering if I'd broken the law, not knowing what would happen next. Dad came up then, a glass in each hand, and he said, "Officers, I thought you might enjoy a drink." "Thanks very much, but we're on duty. We could accept a Coke, though," they said. After that, their attitude improved. They said I'd had to have the car towed tomorrow at the very latest. Then they stayed for close to an hour talking to the rest of the guests. The next day I had my poor old BMW towed to a garage only to find out my insurance had expired the week before. To get it back in working condition would cost at least $1,000. So after much deliberation, I sadly sold it to the garage for $450. I was heartbroken. I was heartbroken to lose my beloved car. I blamed Dad for the crash, and at the same time I felt ashamed I hadn't been up to the test. I wanted him to say something. I wanted him to say something to make me feel better. I also wanted him to offer to pay for the repairs, but that never seemed to cross his mind. Most of all, I was still angry and upset he'd brought Suzanne with him. Once again, he had disappointed me by putting me in a situation in which I believed I had to act nice, when what I really wanted to do was to say, "Go fuck yourself." As usual, I didn't dwell on the anger. Instead, I transformed this trip to Boulder and the accident into a funny anecdote to tell friends at parties. But the real effects of the crash lay dormant within me, a sleeper waiting to be awakened. Not long after, I left graduate school, having grown bored with my classes. I'd finally realized how much work it took to earn a PhD. I'd have to write many papers and do loads of research, and I didn't see myself staying in academia for the rest of my life. For some time, I had been considering going to medical school. It seemed a good and practical profession. I wanted to become a psychiatrist like my mother, and so, soon after Dad's visit, I signed up for pre-med courses. I quickly found out I didn't understand calculus at all. It was a mysterious, abstract language to which I didn't have the key. To make matters worse, I wasn't the least bit interested in organic chemistry or physics. Except for that first depressing year at Barnard, I had always done well academically. So not being able to understand calculus was a huge blow to my ego. I crashed again, this time emotionally. First, I couldn't sleep and started having a couple of drinks in the evening. That relaxed me enough to nod off, but I would wake at 4 a.m. feeling confused and anxious about my future. Med school was clearly out of the picture. I was out of wind, with no projects looming on the horizon. I knew I was depressed. This terrible heaviness had hung over me before, only this time it was much worse. I drove to Denver to see a psychiatrist a friend had recommended. I walked into her neat office, sat down, and began to cry. I told her about my father and Suzanne, my wrecked car, the failed attempt to go to medical school, and my drinking at night. She listened, and I felt understood. And then she prescribed antidepressants. "I don't approve of them," I said. "I'm not sure what they'll do to my mind." Straight out of the mouth of Norman Mailer. The doctor looked at me seriously. She said, "So you think drinking yourself to sleep will be better for your mind?" Yeah, she had a point, but I didn't budge. Instead, I got a job waitressing at a bar in town. I went out with friends. I drank and partied, trying to brighten the darkness with excitement. A couple of months later, I took a trip to Mexico to attend my childhood friend Karina's wedding. I would end up staying there for 7 years. Thank you.